You're a disgrace to the Reeves name. Pack your things and get out." My father's words sliced through the air like the precision scalpels he wielded in his operating room. 7 years of silence would follow, my existence erased from family conversations as if I'd never been born. But I rebuilt myself from nothing, case by case, until Your Honor became the title that preceded my name in packed courtrooms. Then came the ivory wedding invitation with my brother's name embossed in gold. And everything I'd fought to build was about to collide with everything I'd left behind. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The mahogany walls of my father's study had witnessed countless family meetings over the years, but none quite like this one. Dr. Benjamin Reeves sat behind his imposing desk, the same one where 4 generations of Reeves men had made decisions that shaped lives and carved legacies in the medical field. Tonight, those same walls would witness the fracturing of everything I thought I knew about family. "Natalie, sit down," he commanded, not looking up from the medical journal spread before him. The leather chair felt cold beneath me, nothing like the warm embraces this room had once offered when I was small enough to curl up in grandmother's lap while she read me stories. My brother Adrian lounged in the chair beside me, his confidence radiating like heat from a furnace. At 26, he was already making waves in the neurosurgery department, following our father's footsteps with the precision of a well-trained soldier. His designer suit fit him perfectly, just like the role of favored son. "We need to discuss your future," Father continued, finally raising his eyes to meet mine. Those steel gray eyes that had once looked at me with pride now held something colder, disappointment mixed with barely controlled anger. I straightened my shoulders, trying to project a confidence I didn't feel. "If this is about medical school again, it's about your complete lack of respect for everything this family has built," Adrian interrupted, his voice sharp. "Do you have any idea what people are saying? Dr. Reeves' daughter, the dropout, the failure who couldn't handle the pressure." My mother, Patricia, shifted uncomfortably in her chair by the window, her perfectly manicured fingers twisting her pearl necklace. She'd been quiet since I'd entered the room, but I could see the conflict in her eyes. The eternal diplomat, caught between her husband's expectations and her daughter's rebellion. "I didn't drop out," I said firmly. "I made a conscious choice to pursue something that actually matters to me." Father's fist hit the desk like a sound of thunder. "Matters to you? Natalie, we've invested everything in your education, private schools, the best tutors, connections that other families would kill for. And you throw it all away for what? To become a glorified social worker?" The words hit harder than any physical blow could have. A glorified social worker. That's how they saw my decision to pursue law, specifically family law. In their world of prestigious medical conferences and life-saving surgeries, my passion for helping families navigate custody battles and protecting children from abuse was nothing more than an embarrassing hobby. "I'm going to law school," I said, my voice steadier than I felt. "I've already been accepted to 3 programs. I can make a real difference in people's lives." Adrian laughed, but there was no humor in it. "Make a difference? Natalie, surgeons save lives every day. We literally hold beating hearts in our hands. What could possibly be more important than that?" I turned to face him fully, this brother who had once built pillow forts with me and taught me how to ride a bike. "Not everyone needs their heart fixed, Adrian. Some people need someone to fight for their rights, to give them a voice when they can't speak for themselves." "Enough." Father's voice cut through our argument like ice. "Natalie, you have a choice to make. You can honor the Reeves legacy, return to medical school in the fall, and take your rightful place in this family. Or," he paused, letting the weight of his words settle, "you can pursue this foolish path and find yourself completely on your own."
The ultimatum hung in the air like smoke from a fire. I looked around the room at the portraits of Reeves doctors spanning generations, at the medical degrees and awards covering every wall, and the bronze sculpture of Hippocrates that had always reminded me of the weight of family expectations. You're not talking about financial support, are you?
Father's expression didn't change. If you walk away from medicine, you walk away from this family. Your trust fund, your place in the Reeves Medical Foundation, your name on the hospital wing we're dedicating next year. All of it disappears. My mother finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. Benjamin, perhaps we're being too hasty. No, Patricia, he cut her off. Natalie needs to understand the consequences of her choices. There are no participation trophies in life. I felt something break inside me, like a cable snapping under too much weight. This wasn't about money or prestige or even family legacy. This was about control, about the inability to accept that I might have my own dreams, my own definition of success. Then, I guess I'll be finding my own way, I said, standing up with a calmness that surprised even me. Adrian's face transformed, his earlier confidence replaced by something uglier. You're making the biggest mistake of your life, Nat. You think you're so noble, so righteous, but you're just selfish. You're throwing away everything. Our family's reputation, Dad's legacy, Mom's pride. For what? To defend criminals and deadbeat parents? His words were designed to hurt, and they found their mark. But instead of crumbling, I felt something else rising inside me, determination. Maybe I am selfish, I said, looking each of them in the eye. Maybe wanting to follow my own path instead of living someone else's dream is selfish, but I'd rather be selfish than live a lie for the rest of my life. Father stood slowly, his presence filling the room like a gathering storm. Then, you're no daughter of mine. Pack your belongings and leave this house. Don't come back until you're ready to apologize and return to your senses. The finality of his words echoed in the sudden silence. I waited for someone to protest, to tell him he was going too far. But Adrian was smirking, satisfied with the outcome he'd helped orchestrate. Mother was crying silently, her tears falling onto her clasped hands. And Father was already turning back to his medical journal, dismissing me as if I'd never existed. I walked to the door on legs that felt like lead, my hand trembling as I reached for the handle. In the hallway, I could hear the grandfather clock ticking, counting down the seconds until my old life ended and an uncertain new one began. Natalie. My mother's voice caught me at the stairs. She'd followed me out, her face streaked with tears. I'm sorry, she whispered, pressing something into my hand. This isn't what I wanted. I looked down to find a small silver locket, my grandmother's, along with a folded check. Take it, she urged. It's not much, but it'll help you get started. The check was for $5,000, probably everything she had in her personal account. Mom, I can't. Yes, you can, she said firmly. Your grandmother would have wanted you to have choices. She was the only woman in this family who ever stood up to the men. She squeezed my hands. Maybe it runs in the bloodline. As I packed my belongings in the bedroom where I'd grown up, I found myself looking at the photos scattered across my dresser. Birthday parties, family vacations, graduation ceremonies, all featuring the four of us, smiling and perfect for the camera. By tomorrow, I knew those photos would be taken down, stored away like evidence of a mistake the family preferred to forget. The last thing I packed was a framed photo of Grandmother Rose and me from my high school graduation. She'd been gone for 3 years now, but I could still hear her voice. Natalie, my dear, never let anyone make you smaller to fit into their idea of who you should be.
I zipped up my suitcase and took a last look around the room that had been my sanctuary for 22 years. Then I walked out of the Reeves family home in Hillcrest District, my head held high despite the tears streaming down my face. 7 years. That's how long it would be before I saw any of them again. 7 years of struggle, of building myself from nothing, of proving that the disgraced daughter could become something more than they ever imagined. 7 years, until an ivory wedding invitation would arrive at my courthouse chambers, bearing my brother's name and about to change everything once again.
The studio apartment in downtown's cheapest district was a far cry from the sprawling Reeves mansion I'd called home for 22 years. At 400 square feet, it barely had room for a bed, a desk, and a kitchenette that consisted of a hot plate and a mini fridge that hummed constantly like an angry bee. The walls were paper thin, letting in every argument from the neighbors and every siren from the street below. But it was mine, paid for with my own money from my job at Murphy's Diner, and that made it feel like a palace. My mother's $5,000 had gotten me through the first 3 months, covering the security deposit, basic furniture from thrift stores, and enough ramen noodles to feed a small army. After that, I was completely on my own, working double shifts at the diner while attending law school classes during the day. The fluorescent lights of the diner's kitchen became as familiar as any classroom, and the smell of grease and coffee seemed permanently embedded in my hair. "Order up," shouted Murphy, the gruff owner who'd hired me despite my complete lack of restaurant experience. He was a former Marine with arms covered in tattoos and a heart bigger than his intimidating exterior suggested. "Table 6 wants their eggs over easy, not scrambled. Fix it." I grabbed the plate and hurried to the customer, a businessman in an expensive suit who looked at me like I was invisible. It was a look I'd grown accustomed to, the way people's eyes slid past service workers as if we were part of the furniture. Little did he know that the woman refilling his coffee cup was studying contract law between orders and would one day preside over cases that shaped people's lives. Law school was brutal in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just the academic workload, though that was crushing enough. It was the constant reminder that I didn't belong. My classmates drove cars that cost more I made in a year, wore clothes that probably cost more than my monthly rent, and casually discussed their family connections to prestigious law firms over expensive lunches I couldn't afford. "Reeves, right?" asked Jessica Cheng, one of my study group partners, during our first-year constitutional law review session. "Any relation to the Reeves Medical Center? My dad had his surgery there." I kept my eyes on my notes, highlighting a passage about due process. "No relation," I lied smoothly. It was easier than explaining why the daughter of a prominent medical family was working at a diner and living in a neighborhood most of my classmates wouldn't drive through at night. But isolation was the hardest part. I'd grown up surrounded by family dinners, holiday traditions, and the constant buzz of a house full of people who, despite their flaws, had been my world. Now my only regular companion was Mrs. Chen, my elderly neighbor who spoke broken English but always had a smile and sometimes shared her homemade dumplings when she could smell that I was eating ramen again. She would say, "You study too much," peering through her doorway when I'd emerge from my apartment with books stacked in my arms. "Need balance, need friends, need life." She was right. But friends were a luxury I couldn't afford. While my classmates went to bars and networking events, I was either working, studying, or collapsing from exhaustion. My social life consisted of brief conversations with regular customers of the diner and study group sessions where I felt like an imposter in my thrift store clothes among designer outfits. The financial pressure was relentless. Student loans covered tuition, but living expenses were my responsibility. I learned to stretch a dollar like a piece of taffy, shopping at discount grocery stores, mending clothes instead of buying new ones, and walking everywhere to save on gas and parking. My law school classmates complained about their meal plans while I calculated whether I could afford both lunch and dinner on the same day. There were nights when I questioned everything. Sitting at my tiny desk at 2 a.m. trying to read case law while the sound of sirens wailed outside and my upstairs neighbor's music thumped through the ceiling, I wondered if my father had been right. Maybe I was throwing away a secure future for an impossible dream.
maybe Adrian's words about being selfish had hit closer to home than I wanted to admit. The lowest point came during my second year. I'd been battling the flu for a week, trying to work through it because I couldn't afford to miss shifts at the diner. During a particularly brutal constitutional law exam, I collapsed in the classroom, my body finally giving in to the combination of illness, exhaustion, and malnutrition that had become my normal state. I woke up in the campus health center with Professor Martinez, my constitutional law professor, sitting beside my bed with a concerned expression. "Miss Reeves, when's the last time you had a proper meal?"
The question broke something inside me, and before I could stop myself, I was crying. Not the quiet tears I'd learned to shed in private, but ugly, exhausted sobs that came from months of holding everything together by sheer willpower. Professor Martinez didn't ask questions. Instead, she arranged for me to receive a work-study position in the law library, which paid better than the diner and allowed me to study while working. She also connected me with the school's emergency financial aid program, which provided a small grant that meant I could afford to eat more than once a day. "Why are you helping me?" I asked her after my first week in the library. She smiled, adjusting her reading glasses. "Because I see something in you, Miss Reeves. A determination that can't be taught. Most students here have safety nets, family money, connections, guaranteed positions waiting for them. You're building something from nothing, and that makes you dangerous in the best possible way." Her words became my anchor during the darkest moments. Dangerous in the best possible way. I started to see my struggles not as evidence of my inadequacy, but as proof of my strength. Every late night spent studying while my classmates partied, every dollar saved and stretched, every small victory earned through pure effort was building something unshakable inside me. My grades, which had started as merely competitive, began to soar. Turns out, when you have nothing to fall back on, you develop a work ethic that can't be matched by those who've never faced real consequences for failure. I made law review in my second year, an honor that shocked even me. The letter of acceptance felt like validation, proof that I belonged here, that I could compete with the best of them, despite my circumstances. By my third year, I'd found my calling in family law. Maybe it was growing up in a family that looked perfect from the outside but was fractured within, or maybe it was the way my own family had discarded me the moment I became inconvenient. Whatever the reason, I gravitated toward cases involving custody battles, domestic violence, and children's rights. These weren't the glamorous corporate law positions my classmates coveted, but they felt real in a way that boardroom negotiations never could. My first internship was at Pine Valley Legal Aid, a small nonprofit that served low-income families who couldn't afford private attorneys. The office was cramped and underfunded, with donated furniture and a coffee machine that had seen better decades. But it was there that I learned what it really meant to practice law, not as an intellectual exercise, but as a lifeline for people who had nowhere else to turn. "You're different from our usual interns," observed Sarah Kim, the clinic's director, after I'd been there for a month. "Most law students see this as community service they have to endure. You treat it like it matters." "Because it does matter," I replied, looking up from the custody case file I was reviewing. "These families are fighting for their futures, their children, their dignity. If we don't fight for them, who will?" Sarah smiled, and I saw something like recognition in her eyes. "You know, we have a full-time position opening up after graduation. The pay isn't much, but..." "Yes," I said before she could finish. "Whatever it is, yes." As graduation approached, I allowed myself a moment of pride. I'd survived law school, made law review, and secured a job doing work I believed in. I'd built a life from nothing, without family money or connections or any safety net except my own determination. When I walked across that stage to receive my diploma, I would be walking toward a future I'd created entirely on my own terms. The night before graduation, I sat in my tiny apartment, the same 400 square feet I'd called home for 3 years, and wrote a letter I would never send. It was addressed to my family, telling them about every struggle, every small victory, Every moment when I'd thought about giving up but pushed through anyway. I told them about the scholarship I'd earned, the law review position, the job waiting for me at the legal aid clinic. I told them I was proud of who I'd become, even if they couldn't be. Then I folded the letter carefully and put it in a box with all the other unsent letters I'd written over the years. Someday, I thought, maybe they'd want to know who I'd become, but for now, it was enough that I knew.
The Pine Valley Legal Aid Clinic became my proving ground, a place where the theoretical knowledge I'd gained in law school met the raw reality of people's lives falling apart. My first case was a custody battle involving Maria Santos, a single mother whose ex-husband was using his family's money and connections to try to take away her 7-year-old daughter. He claimed Maria was unfit because she worked 2 jobs and lived in a modest apartment while he could provide private schools and a mansion in the suburbs. "They say I'm not good enough for my own daughter," Maria told me through tears during our first meeting, her hands shaking as she clutched a folder of documents. "Because I clean houses and work at a grocery store? Because I don't have money for fancy lawyers?" Looking at her, I saw my own story reflected back, a woman being told she wasn't enough, that her choices made her somehow lesser. The difference was that Maria was fighting for her child, while I had been fighting for my own identity. "Money doesn't make someone a good parent," I told her firmly. "Love, stability, and dedication do, and we're going to prove that in court." The case consumed my first 6 months at the clinic. I spent nights researching precedents, weekends interviewing witnesses, and every spare moment building an ironclad argument for why a mother's love and consistency mattered more than a father's bank account. When we walked into that courtroom, I was nervous but prepared. The opposing counsel was everything I expected: expensive suit, condescending smile, and the kind of confidence that comes from never having to worry about anything. He painted Maria as negligent and irresponsible, suggesting that any parent who worked multiple jobs couldn't properly supervise a child. When it was my turn to speak, I stood up with a calmness that surprised even me. "Your Honor," I began, "opposing counsel would have you believe that poverty is a crime and that working hard to provide for your child is evidence of neglect. But Maria Santos wakes up at 5 a.m. every day to make her daughter breakfast before school. She helps with homework every evening after her second shift ends. She has never missed a parent-teacher conference, a doctor's appointment, or a school play. She may not have money, but she has given her daughter the one thing money can't buy: unwavering love and attention." I presented evidence of Maria's involvement in her daughter's life, testimonials from teachers about what a well-adjusted, loved child she was, and documentation of the father's prolonged absences due to his demanding social life. By the time I finished, I could see the judge's expression had shifted. We won. Not only did Maria retain custody, but the judge's ruling included language about the importance of parental involvement over financial resources that would be cited in future cases. Walking out of that courtroom with Maria crying tears of joy and hugging her daughter was the moment I knew I'd found my calling. Word of the Santos case spread quickly through the local legal community. Suddenly, I wasn't just another legal aid attorney. I was the young lawyer who had taken down one of the city's most prestigious family law firms with superior preparation and passionate advocacy. "You've got something special," Sarah Kim told me after my first-year performance review. "I've been doing this for 15 years, and I've never seen anyone prepare cases the way you do. It's like you take every case personally." She was right. I did take them personally. Every client who walked through our doors had been discounted or dismissed by someone with more power, more money, or more connections. They reminded me of myself in that mahogany-paneled study, being told I wasn't enough to be part of my own family. My second year brought even more challenging cases. I represented an elderly man fighting his children for the right to stay in his own home, a teenage mother trying to maintain custody while finishing high school, and a community organization battling a wealthy developer who wanted to demolish low-income housing. Each victory built my reputation and my confidence.
I spent months researching not just the specific case, but Northland's entire corporate history.
I discovered a pattern of similar tactics used in other cities, always targeting communities that lacked the resources to fight back effectively. More importantly, I found evidence that their structural engineer's report had been deliberately falsified. The building was in better condition than they claimed. The trial lasted 2 weeks and was covered by every major local news outlet. On one side sat Northland's team of expensive attorneys in their tailored suits, representing corporate interests and profit margins. On the other side sat me, a legal aid lawyer in a department store suit that I'd bought on sale, representing 3 neighborhoods full of families who depended on the community center for childcare, job training, and social services. This case isn't really about a building, I told the jury in my closing argument. It's about whether communities have the right to exist, whether the needs of families and children matter as much as corporate profits. The Riverside Community Center isn't just a building. It's a lifeline for single mothers trying to work while their children are safely cared for. It's a place where teenagers can go after school instead of hanging out on street corners. It's where elderly residents gather to combat isolation and loneliness. Northland Corporation wants to tear down more than bricks and mortar. They want to tear apart the fabric of 3 communities. We won a complete victory. Not only did the community center stay open, but the judge ordered Northland to pay damages for their fraudulent engineering report and to fund building improvements. The case made headlines across the state and established legal precedents about corporate responsibility and community rights. The morning after the verdict, I found reporters waiting outside the clinic, wanting to interview the young lawyer who had taken down one of the most powerful corporations in the city. For the first time since leaving my family's home, I felt truly proud of what I'd accomplished. "How does it feel to be the giant killer?" asked one reporter. I thought about the question for a moment, remembering that scared young woman who had packed her belongings and left everything she'd ever known. "It feels like justice," I said simply. The Riverside case changed everything. Suddenly, I was receiving calls from other attorneys wanting to collaborate, from law schools wanting me to speak to their students, and from judges who had taken notice of my work. My name began appearing in legal journals, and I was invited to conferences where I shared strategies for representing underserved communities. But the most meaningful recognition came from an unexpected source. Judge Patricia Williamson, the most respected family court judge in the district, called me into her chambers after I had appeared before her on a custody case. "Miss Reeves," she said, removing her reading glasses and studying me carefully, "I've been watching your work for some time now. You have exceptional legal skills, but more than that, you have something that can't be taught: genuine compassion combined with fierce determination." I thanked her, unsure where she was heading with the conversation. "I'm retiring in 2 years," she continued. "The governor will need to appoint someone to fill my position. I think you should consider applying for the bench." The suggestion stunned me. I was only 28 years old, barely 5 years out of law school. Judges were supposed to be seasoned attorneys with decades of experience, not former diner waitresses who still shopped at thrift stores. "I appreciate the confidence," I said carefully, "but I think I need more experience before considering something like that." Judge Williamson smiled. "Miss Reeves, in my 20 years on the bench, I've seen attorneys with 30 years of experience who understand the law but don't understand people. You understand both. Don't let anyone convince you that you're not ready for the opportunities you've earned." As I walked back to the clinic that day, her words echoed in my mind. For 7 years, I'd been building something brick by brick, case by case, client by client. I'd started as a disgraced daughter with nothing but determination, and I'd become an attorney with a growing reputation for taking on impossible cases and winning. Maybe Judge Williamson was right. Maybe I had earned the right to dream bigger than I'd ever imagined possible. The ivory envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning that started like any other. I was reviewing case files in my new office, a significant upgrade from the cramped quarters at Pine Valley Legal Aid. After Judge Williamson's recommendation and my growing reputation, I'd been offered a position at Henderson and Associates, a mid-sized firm that handled both private clients and pro bono work. The pay increase meant I could finally afford an apartment with a separate bedroom and a kitchen table that wasn't also my desk. My assistant, Mrs. Patterson, knocked softly on my door. "Judge Reeves, your personal mail." She still called me judge, even though my appointment to the bench wouldn't be official for another month. The governor had announced my nomination just 2 weeks prior, making me the youngest person ever selected for the Central Valley Courthouse. I accepted the small stack of letters without looking up from the custody agreement I was reviewing. Bills, legal journals, a thank you note from a former client. And then I saw it. Cream-colored paper, expensive weight, with an address written in elegant calligraphy. But it was the return address that made my breath catch. Mr. and Mrs. Benjamin Reeves, Hillcrest District. My hands trembled slightly as I turned the envelope over, finding the gold embossed seal I remembered from childhood, the Reeves family crest that had been used on formal communications for 4 generations. 7 years. 7 years of complete silence, and now this? I set the envelope aside and tried to focus on my work, but my eyes kept drifting back to it. The weight of it seemed to fill the room, bringing with it a flood of memories I'd carefully locked away. Sunday dinners around the massive dining room table, Christmas mornings with perfectly wrapped presents arranged under a 12-foot tree, Adrian and me as children running through the halls of the mansion, our laughter echoing off marble floors. But also darker memories, the cold disappointment in my father's eyes, Adrian's cruel words about selfishness and failure, the way my mother had stood silently while they dismantled my place in the family piece by piece. At lunch, I called my best friend Jasmine Park, the one person who knew the full story of my estrangement from my family. We'd met during my final year at Henderson and Associates when she'd joined as a corporate attorney, and despite our different backgrounds, we'd bonded over late nights and shared ambitions. An actual paper invitation? Who even does that anymore? Let me guess, your brother's getting married and suddenly remembered he has a sister. I haven't opened it yet, I admitted, staring at the envelope on my desk. Nat, you've been appointed to the bench. You're about to become the Honorable Judge Natalie Reeves. You can handle 1 wedding invitation. She was right, of course. I'd faced down corporate lawyers, argued before appellate courts, and earned the respect of my peers. 1 piece of paper shouldn't reduce me to the scared 22-year-old who'd been banished from her family. After hanging up, I carefully opened the envelope. Inside was exactly what I'd expected, an elegant wedding invitation announcing the marriage of Adrian Christopher Reeves to Camila Elena Santos. The irony of the surname wasn't lost on me. I wondered if this Camila was related to my former client, Maria Santos, though it seemed unlikely, given the obvious expense of the invitation. The wedding was scheduled for the following month at Moonstone Gardens, an exclusive venue where the Reeves family had held celebrations for generations. As children, Adrian and I had played hide-and-seek among the formal gardens while our parents attended various social functions. The ceremony would be at sunset, followed by a reception in the grand ballroom where my grandfather had celebrated his 70th birthday. But it was the small handwritten note tucked behind the formal invitation that truly shocked me. Natalie, I know this comes as a surprise after so many years. I hope you'll consider attending. There's so much I want to say to you, so much I should have said years ago. Please come. We need to talk. Love, Mom. I read the note 3 times, searching for hidden meanings or conditions. My mother's handwriting was exactly as I remembered it, careful, precise, with a slight slant to the right. The paper felt expensive between my fingers, but the words seemed genuine in a way that the formal invitation could never be. That evening, I drove to the cemetery where Grandmother Rose was buried. Her grave was in a quiet section overlooking a small pond, marked by a simple granite stone that read, Rosemarie Reeves, beloved mother and grandmother. I'd visited regularly over the years, especially during difficult times, finding comfort in the one family member who had always understood my need to forge my own path.
"What do I do, Grandma Rose?" I asked, sitting cross-legged on the grass beside her headstone. 7 years of silence, and now they want me at a family wedding like nothing ever happened? The wind rustled through the oak trees above, and I could almost hear her voice. Sometimes, my dear, the bravest thing you can do is show people who you've become. Over the next few days, I researched everything I could find about Adrian's fiancée. Camila Santos was a successful immigration attorney who had graduated from Georgetown Law, impressive credentials that suggested she was more than just another society wife-to-be. Her firm specialized in helping refugee families navigate the complex legal system, work that was both challenging and meaningful. I found several newspaper articles featuring her advocacy for immigrant rights, including one where she'd successfully argued a case before the state Supreme Court. This wasn't the type of woman I would have expected Adrian to choose. Growing up, he'd always gravitated toward people who enhanced his status, the children of other prominent families, fellow medical students from wealthy backgrounds, women who looked good at charity galas and never challenged his opinions. Camila Santos appeared to be different. Her biography mentioned that she was the daughter of immigrants who had built a small restaurant business from nothing. She'd worked her way through law school and built her practice around serving communities that couldn't afford expensive legal representation. In other words, she sounded remarkably like me. The more I learned about her, the more curious I became. What had Adrian told her about his family? About me? Did she know that the successful surgeon she was marrying had a sister he helped banish from the family? Or had she been fed the same story everyone else probably heard? That Dr. Adrian Reeves was the brilliant only child of a distinguished medical family? I spent hours crafting and discarding response letters, formal declinations, angry accusations, cautious acceptances. None of them felt right. How do you respond to an invitation from people who erased you from their lives? How do you decide whether to walk back into a world that had rejected everything you'd become? The decision crystallized during a particularly difficult day in court. I was presiding over a custody case involving a father who had abandoned his children for 3 years and was now demanding visitation rights. His expensive attorney argued that people change, that past mistakes shouldn't define future relationships, that families should be given chances to heal. As I listened to his arguments, I realized the irony. Here I was, a judge who believed in second chances, in the possibility of redemption and growth, refusing to consider the same possibility for my own family. Maybe Adrian had changed. Maybe my parents had gained perspective over the years. Maybe this wedding invitation was their way of extending an olive branch I'd been too proud to see. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a simple piece of stationery and wrote a brief response. Thank you for the invitation. I will attend. Looking forward to seeing everyone again. Natalie. I didn't sign it with love or warmth, but I also didn't let anger poison the words. It was a neutral response that committed me to no more than showing up. As I sealed the envelope and prepared to mail it the next morning, I wondered if I was making a mistake. 7 years had changed me fundamentally. I was no longer the uncertain young woman who had been intimidated by my family's expectations. I was Judge Natalie Reeves now, a woman who commanded respect in courtrooms and had earned her place through merit rather than birthright. Perhaps it was time they met the person I'd become. Perhaps it was time to stop running from my past and instead let it see how far I'd traveled without them.
The week leading up to Adrian's wedding passed in a blur of nervous energy and careful preparation. I found myself standing in the mirror of my apartment's bedroom, trying on outfit after outfit, like a teenager preparing for prom. Nothing felt right. Too formal, and I'd look like I was trying too hard. Too casual, and they'd assume I hadn't done well for myself. Too expensive, and they'd think I was flaunting my success. Too modest, and they'd believe their assumptions about my failure had been correct. "You're overthinking this," Jasmine said, sprawled across my bed, surrounded by rejected dresses. She'd insisted on helping me prepare, claiming that moral support was essential for facing family demons. Just wear something that makes you feel powerful. I held up a navy blue dress that I'd worn to my judicial confirmation hearing. "This one?" "Perfect," she nodded. "Conservative enough for a wedding, but it screams, I'm successful and you can't intimidate me. Plus, that color brings out your eyes." The dress choice was only part of my preparation.
I'd also spent hours researching the guest list, trying to anticipate who would be there and what questions they might ask. My father's medical colleagues would likely attend, along with Adrian's surgical friends and the extended Reeves family network. People who had known me as a child, who had heard the official story of my departure from the family, who might be surprised to see me after 7 years of absence. I'd prepared answers for the inevitable questions. "What have you been up to?" would be met with a simple, "I'm a judge now." "Are you married?" would receive a polite, "Not yet, too focused on my career." "Still living in the city?" would be answered with details about my work rather than my address. I practiced these responses in my bathroom mirror until they sounded natural rather than defensive. The most difficult part of my preparation was emotional rather than practical. Returning to Moonstone Gardens meant confronting memories I'd spent years carefully compartmentalizing. The venue held decades of family history, birthday parties, anniversaries, holiday celebrations, where the Reeves family had gathered to maintain appearances and reinforce traditions. I remembered being 12 years old at my cousin's wedding at Moonstone Gardens, dancing with Adrian to a slow song while he tried to teach me not to step on his feet. He'd been 15 then, all gangly limbs and awkward charm, patient with his younger sister, even though his friends were watching. That night, he'd snuck me an extra piece of cake and told me that someday I'd have a wedding there too, and he'd give the most embarrassing maid of honor speech in family history. The memory was so vivid, it made my chest ache. When had we stopped being allies? When had sibling rivalry transformed into genuine animosity? I could trace the progression through specific moments. The first time he'd corrected me about medical terminology at a family dinner, the way he'd started introducing me as my little sister who's still figuring things out, the gradual shift from protective older brother to competitor who saw my successes as threats to his position. But there had been good times too, especially before our teenage years, when family expectations hadn't yet divided us into opposing camps. Summer afternoons spent building elaborate sandcastles at the family beach house, with Adrian as the architect and me as the enthusiastic construction crew. Winter evenings when we'd team up against our parents in board games, developing elaborate strategies and secret signals that usually resulted in our victory and their suspicious laughter. He'd taught me to ride a bike on the circular driveway of our family home, running alongside me for hours until I finally found my balance. He'd defended me from bullies at school, using his status as an older student to ensure that anyone who messed with his little sister would regret it. He even helped me with my science fair projects, patiently explaining complex concepts until I understood them well enough to win first place 3 years running. The night before the wedding, I couldn't sleep. I kept thinking about my mother's handwritten note, wondering what she wanted to say after 7 years of silence. Had she regretted supporting my father's ultimatum? Had she followed my career from a distance, proud but unable to admit it? Or was this invitation simply about maintaining family appearances, ensuring that Adrian's wedding photos wouldn't raise questions about missing relatives?
I found myself pulling out the box of unsent letters I'd written to my family over the years. Letters written during my first Christmas alone, describing the quiet apartment where I'd eaten ramen noodles while watching other people's families celebrate on television. Letters from my law school graduation, sharing my pride and accomplishment with people who would never read them. Letters from my first major case victory, wanting to share my success with the people who had shaped my competitive drive, even as they tried to redirect it. The most recent letter had been written after my judicial appointment was announced. In it, I'd told them about Judge Williamson's mentorship, about the cases that had shaped my perspective on justice, about the moment when the governor had called to offer me the position. I'd written about sitting in my office, wearing the black robe for the first time, feeling the weight of responsibility and the satisfaction of having earned my place through merit rather than connections. Reading these letters now, I realized they contained 7 years of growth, struggle, and triumph that my family knew nothing about. They still saw me as the confused 22-year-old who had walked away from medical school. They had no idea who I'd become in their absence. At 6 a.m., I gave up on sleep and went for a run through my neighborhood. The familiar rhythm of my footsteps on pavement helped calm my racing thoughts. I ran past the coffee shop where I'd studied for the bar exam, past the legal aid clinic where I'd learned to fight for people who couldn't fight for themselves, past the courthouse where I'd soon be presiding over cases that would shape people's lives. This was my world now, built step by step through choices that had led me away from my family's expectations and toward my own definition of success. Today, I would return to their world as a visitor, not as someone seeking acceptance or approval. I was Judge Natalie Reeves, and that title meant something regardless of whether they acknowledged it. By 3 p.m., I was dressed and ready to leave for Moonstone Gardens. The navy dress fit perfectly, my grandmother's pearl earrings added just the right touch of elegance, and my hair was styled in the professional updo I wore for important court appearances. Looking in the mirror, I saw a confident woman who had earned her place in the world. Jasmine insisted on driving me to the venue, claiming that I shouldn't have to worry about parking or finding my way home if the evening became too overwhelming. "You look amazing," she said as we pulled into my driveway, "like someone who could sentence people to jail time." "That's exactly the look I was going for," I replied, checking my appearance one final time in the passenger mirror. As we drove toward Moonstone Gardens, I watched familiar landmarks pass by. The private school where Adrian and I had both attended, the country club where we'd learned to play tennis, the medical center where my father had built his reputation. This had been my world once, a place where I'd been expected to follow a predetermined path toward a predetermined future. Now, I was returning as someone who had chosen her own path and succeeded beyond anyone's expectations. Whatever happened tonight, I would face it as the person I'd fought to become, not the person they'd tried to force me to be. "Ready?" Jasmine asked as we pulled into the venue's circular driveway. I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of my grandmother's pearls against my neck like a talisman of strength. "Ready."
Moonstone Gardens hadn't changed in the 7 years since I'd last seen it. The wrought iron gates still bore the elegant script spelling out the venue's name, and the cobblestone driveways still wound through perfectly manicured gardens toward the main estate. Luxury cars lined the circular drive, Mercedes, BMWs, and Teslas that probably cost more than most people's annual salaries. I recognized some of the license plates from my childhood, my father's colleagues, family friends, members of the country club where I'd learned to swim and play tennis before discovering that I preferred books to sports. "Text me if you need an emergency extraction," Jasmine said, as I gathered my small purse and checked my appearance one final time. "I'll be at Morrison's Cafe downtown. One word from you and I'll come up with a family emergency that requires your immediate attention." I squeezed her hand gratefully. "I'll be fine. This is just reconnaissance. I show up, they see I'm successful, I leave with my dignity intact." "Famous last words," she muttered, but she was smiling. "Go show them what they lost." Walking through the entrance of Moonstone Gardens felt like stepping back in time. The marble foyer with its crystal chandelier looked exactly as I remembered, and the familiar scent of white roses and expensive perfume transported me instantly to childhood memories of formal events where I'd worn itchy dresses and been told to speak only when spoken to. The cocktail hour was in full swing in the garden courtyard, where approximately 200 guests mingled among topiary sculptures and fountain displays. I could see my family's social circle scattered throughout the crowd, my father's colleagues from the medical center, my mother's book club friends, distant relatives I hadn't seen since my teenage years. Everyone looked prosperous and polished, exactly as they had 7 years ago, as if time had frozen the moment I'd walked out of my family's life. I positioned myself near a marble column where I could observe without being easily spotted, accepting a glass of champagne from a passing waiter. From this vantage point, I could see my parents holding court near the central fountain, surrounded by the usual circle of admirers who hung on every word from the distinguished Dr. Benjamin Reeves and his elegant wife, Patricia. My father looked older than I'd expected. His once dark hair, now completely silver, though he still carried himself with the same commanding presence that had intimidated me as a child. He wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray suit and was gesturing animatedly while telling what was probably a story about a recent surgery. The assembled crowd laughed at appropriate intervals, their deference as predictable as sunrise.
My mother stood beside him in a pale blue dress that complemented her still striking features. She'd always been beautiful in that timeless way that money and good breeding seemed to guarantee, but there were new lines around her eyes that spoke of stress or sadness. She smiled and nodded at the right moments, playing her role as the supportive wife, but I noticed her eyes occasionally scanning the crowd, as if searching for someone. Then I spotted Adrian. My brother stood near the rose garden with his groomsmen, looking every inch the successful surgeon in his custom-tailored tuxedo. At 31, he'd grown into the commanding presence he'd always aspired to, his confidence evident in the way he dominated the conversation and drew laughter from his friends. He was taller than I remembered, or perhaps success had simply made him seem larger than life. But it was the woman beside him that truly captured my attention. Camila Santos was even more striking in person than in her professional headshots. She wore an elegant off-white cocktail dress that somehow managed to be both sophisticated and approachable, her dark hair styled in soft waves that framed intelligent brown eyes. What struck me most was how comfortable she seemed in this rarefied social environment, moving gracefully between conversations and engaging with guests who clearly adored her. She laughed at something one of Adrian's groomsmen said, then smoothly redirected a conversation that had become too focused on medical shop talk to include the wives who had been standing silently nearby. She had a natural warmth that drew people in, very different from the calculated charm I remembered from other women Adrian had dated. "She's lovely, isn't she?" a voice said beside me. I turned to find my Aunt Rebecca, my father's younger sister, approaching with a knowing smile. She looked exactly as I remembered, petite, perfectly coiffed, with sharp eyes that missed nothing. "Aunt Rebecca," I said carefully, unsure how she would react to my presence.
Natalie! She air-kissed my cheek as if 7 years of absence had been 7 days. I wondered if you'd come. Your mother mentioned she'd sent an invitation, though she wasn't sure you'd received it. The casual tone suggested she was testing me, trying to determine how much I knew about the family dynamics that had led to my invitation. "I got it," I said simply. "Couldn't miss Adrian's big day." "Of course not. You two were always so close." There was something in her voice. Was it irony? Genuine sentiment? With Aunt Rebecca, it was impossible to tell. "You look wonderful, dear. Very professional. I heard through the grapevine that you've done well for yourself." I wondered what grapevine she was referring to and exactly what she'd heard. "I've been fortunate." "A judge, I'm told. How impressive." Her smile was perfectly calibrated to convey approval without enthusiasm. "Though I suppose it shouldn't surprise anyone. You always were the stubborn one, determined to do things your own way." Before I could respond, a commotion near the entrance caught our attention. More guests were arriving, and I recognized several faces from my childhood. My father's department colleagues, family friends who had known me since I was small. Their presence reminded me that tonight wasn't just about facing my immediate family. It was about confronting an entire social circle that had witnessed my dramatic exit from their world. "I should go find your parents," Aunt Rebecca said with a meaningful look. "I'm sure they'd love to see you." I wasn't ready for that encounter yet, so I excused myself and moved deeper into the crowd, using my height and years of courtroom experience to navigate social situations without drawing unwanted attention. I found myself near a group of younger guests who were discussing current events. Their conversation eventually turned to local politics and recent judicial appointments. "Did you hear about the new judge they appointed to Central Valley? Supposedly, she's incredibly young, but already has this amazing reputation for handling complex family law cases." "Judge Reeves?" replied another guest. "I read an article about her in the legal journal. She took down Northland Development in that community center case. Brilliant legal work." I nearly choked on my champagne. They were talking about me, discussing my professional accomplishments at my own brother's wedding, completely unaware that the subject of their conversation was standing 3 feet away. Apparently, she came from nothing, self-made success story, started at legal aid and worked her way up through pure talent and determination.
Those are the best kind of judges, the ones who understand what it's like for regular people navigating the legal system. I excused myself from their vicinity before someone could notice my expression and moved toward the opposite side of the courtyard, where I spotted more familiar faces from my past. The conversations followed similar patterns: polite inquiries about work and family, careful avoidance of anything too personal, the subtle social dance of people who knew each other well enough to detect landmines, but not well enough to disarm them. What struck me most was how little anyone seemed to have changed. The same hierarchies existed, the same topics dominated conversations, the same underlying competitiveness masked itself as friendly interest. It was as if I was looking at a perfectly preserved tableau from my childhood, complete with all the same players performing their assigned roles. As the cocktail hour began winding down and guests started moving toward the ceremony site, I realized I'd been successfully invisible for nearly an hour. I'd observed my family, assessed the social dynamics, and confirmed that my presence hadn't yet caused any dramatic upheavals. Perhaps I could maintain this low profile throughout the entire event, attending as promised, but avoiding the confrontations I'd been dreading. That optimistic thought lasted exactly until Camila Santos looked directly at me across the crowded courtyard, her eyes widening with unmistakable recognition.
For a moment, time seemed suspended. Camila and I stared at each other across the crowded courtyard while conversations continued around us, guests blissfully unaware that everything was about to change. I could see the wheels turning in her mind as she processed what she was seeing. The young judge she'd researched and admired, standing at her own wedding rehearsal, clearly connected to the Reeves family in some way that Adrian had never mentioned. She excused herself from the group of bridesmaids she'd been talking with and began walking toward me with purpose. I considered fleeing, disappearing into the crowd, or stepping outside for some air, but something in her expression stopped me. There was no hostility there, no suspicion, just curiosity and what looked like genuine excitement. "Excuse me," she said as she approached, her voice carrying the same professional warmth I remembered from her appearances in my courtroom. "I don't mean to intrude, but aren't you Judge Natalie Reeves?" The conversations around us faltered as nearby guests turned to see who could possibly warrant such an interruption during the bride's cocktail hour. I felt a familiar courtroom calm descend over me, the same composure that helped me manage difficult proceedings when emotions ran high. "I am," I replied simply, extending my hand. "You must be the bride. Congratulations on your upcoming marriage." "Thank you," Camila said, shaking my hand with obvious enthusiasm. "I can't believe you're here. I've followed your career since law school. Your work in family law is absolutely groundbreaking. The precedents you set in the Morrison custody case and your ruling on the Riverside Community Center have been cited in 3 of my recent cases." Her words carried clearly across the courtyard, and I noticed more heads turning our way. My father's colleagues were beginning to pay attention, their expressions shifting from polite cocktail party interest to genuine curiosity. Who was this young judge that the bride was so excited to meet? "Your work with immigrant families is equally impressive," I responded, keeping my tone professional but warm. "I read about your Supreme Court argument in the Hernandez asylum case. Brilliant legal strategy." "You know my work?" Camila's face lit up with the kind of genuine joy that couldn't be faked. "That's incredibly flattering coming from someone of your caliber. I have to ask, how do you know the Reeves family? I don't remember Adrian mentioning any connections to the legal community." The question hung in the air like a challenge. Around us, the conversations had stopped entirely as guests strained to hear my response. I could see my parents' circle beginning to take notice, their attention drawn by the unusual spectacle of their son's bride interviewing someone with obvious reverence. Before I could answer, Adrian appeared beside Camila, his hand possessively finding her waist. He looked exactly as I remembered him in moments of social performance. Confident smile, perfect posture, ready to charm whatever situation required his attention. "Camila, sweetheart, you're being monopolized," he said with practiced ease, then turned to look at me directly for the first time in 7 years.
I hope this guest isn't boring you with too much shop talk." His words died mid-sentence as our eyes met. I watched the color drain from his face, his confident expression cracking like ice under pressure. For a heartbeat, we were children again, siblings who had once shared secrets and inside jokes, who had built snow forts together and competed for our parents' attention. "Adrian," I said calmly, "congratulations. You look well." Camila looked between us with growing confusion, clearly sensing undercurrents she didn't understand. "Wait, you two know each other?" "You could say that," I replied, never taking my eyes off my brother's face. "Adrian is my brother." The words hit the crowd like a physical blow. I could see the shock rippling outward as guests processed what I'd just revealed. The distinguished Dr. Adrian Reeves, the golden child of the Reeves medical dynasty, had a sister who was not only present at his wedding, but was apparently a respected judge that the bride had been fangirling over. "Your brother?" Camila's voice rose several octaves. "Adrian, you told me you were an only child. You said—" She stopped herself, but the damage was done. In front of 200 wedding guests, she just revealed that the groom had lied about his family. Adrian's jaw clenched, and I could see him struggling to regain control of the situation. "Camila, this is complicated. Natalie and we've had disagreements about family expectations. She chose a different path."
A different path? Camila's professional composure was beginning to crack. "Adrian, Judge Reeves is being considered for the state Supreme Court. She's one of the most respected family law judges in the region. What kind of disagreements lead to pretending she doesn't exist?" By now, our conversation had drawn a significant crowd. I could see my father pushing through the gathered guests, his face a mask of controlled fury. My mother followed behind him, her hands pressed to her chest, as if she couldn't quite believe what she was seeing. "Natalie!" My father's voice cut through the murmurs like a scalpel. "What are you doing here?" The question was delivered with all the authority he'd once wielded over me, but something had changed in the intervening years. I was no longer the uncertain young woman who had cowered before his disapproval. I was Judge Natalie Reeves, and I'd earned the right to stand wherever I chose to stand. "I was invited," I replied evenly, pulling the ivory invitation from my purse. "By Mother." All eyes turned to my mother, who straightened her shoulders with surprising resolve. "Yes, I invited her. Benjamin, she's our daughter. This is our son's wedding. She belongs here." "She made her choice 7 years ago," my father said coldly. "She walked away from this family." "No," Camila interrupted, her voice gaining strength as her legal training kicked in. "I'm sorry, but I need to understand what's happening here. Are you telling me that you disowned your daughter for becoming a judge? That you've been pretending she doesn't exist while she's been building one of the most impressive legal careers in the state?" Adrian tried to take her arm. "Camila, please, this isn't the time or place." She pulled away from him. "When is the time, Adrian? When were you planning to tell me that your only child story was a complete lie? That the judge I've been admiring and citing in my work is your sister that you've been denying exists?" "She's not the same person she was," Adrian said desperately. "She turned her back on everything our family stands for. Medicine, tradition, the Reeves legacy." "The Reeves legacy," I finally spoke, my voice carrying the authority I'd learned in courtrooms. "Adrian, I've spent 7 years building my own legacy. I've helped hundreds of families, reformed custody laws, and earned my position through merit rather than inheritance. If that's not something the Reeves family can be proud of, then perhaps the problem isn't with me." The crowd had grown silent, every guest hanging on our words. I could see phones being discreetly pulled out, and I realized this confrontation would probably be gossip fodder for years to come. But I was past caring about appearances or family reputation. Camila looked at Adrian with an expression I recognized from my courtroom, the look of someone reassessing everything they thought they knew.
You told me your family was proud of your accomplishments, that you came from a long line of distinguished professionals. You never once mentioned that your sister had achieved something equally distinguished in a different field? Because she abandoned us. But his voice lacked conviction. She chose her path, and we chose ours. No, my mother said suddenly, stepping forward with tears in her eyes. We chose for her. We gave her an ultimatum that no parent should ever give their child, and when she had the courage to follow her dreams anyway, we punished her for it. The admission hung in the air like smoke, impossible to ignore or take back. Around us, the wedding guests watched in fascinated horror as the perfect Reeves family image crumbled in real time. Camila removed her engagement ring with deliberate slowness and placed it in Adrian's palm. I need time to think, she said quietly. This isn't just about your sister, Adrian. It's about the fact that you've been lying to me about something fundamental for our entire relationship. She turned to me with professional respect restored. Your Honor, I'm sorry you've been put in this position. You deserve better from your family. With that, she walked away toward the main house, leaving Adrian standing with his engagement ring and 200 guests who had just witnessed the destruction of what was supposed to be the happiest day of his life.
The silence that followed Camilla's departure was deafening. 200 guests stood frozen in various states of shock, champagne glasses suspended halfway to lips, conversations abandoned mid-sentence. The only sounds were the gentle splash of the fountain and the distant murmur of catering staff who were blissfully unaware that the entire wedding had just imploded. Adrian stared at the engagement ring in his palm as if he couldn't quite comprehend how it had gotten there. His perfectly styled hair was beginning to come undone, and his usually commanding presence had deflated like a punctured balloon. For the first time in my memory, my brother looked truly vulnerable. "Well," said Uncle Stephen, breaking the silence with characteristic inappropriate timing, "this is certainly more entertaining than the Henderson wedding last month." His comment seemed to break the spell. Guests began murmuring among themselves. Phones appeared more openly as people texted updates to those who weren't present. And the careful social fabric of the evening began unraveling, thread by thread. My father's face had progressed from pale to red to a dangerous shade of purple. "Natalie," he said through gritted teeth, "we need to talk. Now." "Actually," I replied, surprised by how calm I felt, "I think we've said enough for one evening. The truth has a way of speaking for itself." "The truth?" Adrian finally found his voice, turning on me with fury that seemed to explode from years of suppressed resentment. "The truth is that you destroyed my wedding, just like you've destroyed everything else you've touched. You couldn't stand that I was happy, that I'd found someone who understood what family loyalty means." Family loyalty? The words came out sharper than I'd intended. "Adrian, you lied to the woman you claimed to love about my very existence. You told her you were an only child rather than admit you had a sister who succeeded in a different field. How exactly does that demonstrate family loyalty? You walked away from us. You abandoned everything we stand for, everything our family has built for generations. And now you show up here at my wedding to humiliate me in front of everyone I care about." "I came because Mother invited me," I said firmly. "And I've said nothing tonight except respond honestly to direct questions. Your humiliation comes from your own choices, not mine." Dr. Rebecca Martinez, one of my father's surgical colleagues, stepped forward with the kind of professional authority that commanded attention. "I'm sorry to interrupt a family matter, but I have to say, Dr. Reeves, your daughter's reputation in the legal community is extraordinary. The Riverside Community Center case alone established precedents that will protect vulnerable communities for decades." Her intervention seemed to embolden others. Dr. James Patterson, whom I remembered from childhood family gatherings, nodded in agreement.
The medical community has been watching her judicial reforms with remarkable interest. Her approach to family court decisions involving medical issues shows remarkable understanding of both legal and healthcare complexities. I could see my father struggling with this unexpected support from his own colleagues. The narrative he'd constructed about my failure was being challenged by people whose opinions he respected, whose professional judgment he couldn't easily dismiss. "This is hardly the time or place for professional evaluations," my father said stiffly, but his voice lacked its usual authority. "Actually, Dad," I said, using the title deliberately for the first time in 7 years, "I think it's exactly the right time. You've spent 7 years telling people I was a failure, a disappointment who couldn't handle the family expectations. But here's the truth. I didn't fail. I succeeded, just not in the way you demanded." My mother stepped closer, her carefully maintained composure beginning to crack. "Natalie, please. Your father, we made mistakes, terrible mistakes. But does it have to end like this?" "End like what, Mom?" I asked gently. "I didn't end anything. You and Dad ended our relationship 7 years ago when you gave me an ultimatum that no parent should ever give their child. Choose the life we've planned for you, or lose your family forever. Well, I chose my own life, and I've built something I'm proud of." "But at what cost?" my father demanded. "You've lived alone, without family support, without the network and connections that could have—" "That could have what?" I interrupted. "Made my achievements less meaningful? Dad, every case I've won, every precedent I've set, every family I've helped, I did all of that through my own merit. No one handed me anything because of my last name or my family connections. I earned every bit of respect I have."
Adrian was staring at his hands, the engagement ring catching the light from the garden lanterns. When he finally looked up, his expression had shifted from anger to something more complex. Pain, perhaps, or recognition. "Camilla was right," he said quietly. "I should have told her about you. I should have been proud to tell her about you." The admission hung in the air, the first crack in the wall of resentment that had stood between us for 7 years. "Then why didn't you?" I asked, genuinely curious rather than accusatory. He ran a hand through his hair, disturbing his perfect styling even further. Because every time someone mentioned your name, every article about your cases, every award you won, it felt like proof that maybe Dad was wrong. Maybe you hadn't failed. Maybe you'd actually succeeded in a way that He trailed off, unable to finish the thought. "In a way that you what, Adrian?" "In a way that I never could," he admitted. "You built something from nothing, Nat. I followed a path that was laid out for me from birth, using connections and advantages that were handed to me. You created your own path and succeeded anyway." The conversation around us had quieted again, as guests realized they were witnessing something more profound than a simple family argument. This was years of hurt and misunderstanding being excavated in real time. "I never wanted to compete with you," I said softly. "I just wanted to be allowed to be myself." "I know that now," Adrian replied. "But I was so afraid that if you succeeded outside medicine, it would somehow diminish what I'd accomplished inside it. Like there wasn't room for both of us to be successful in different ways." My father had been listening to this exchange with growing discomfort, his carefully constructed worldview being challenged from multiple directions. "This is all very touching," he said finally, "but the damage is done. Adrian's wedding is ruined. Our family's reputation—" "Our family's reputation?" I couldn't help but laugh, though there was no humor in it. "Dad, in the past hour, your colleagues have praised my professional accomplishments, your future daughter-in-law has cited my legal work as inspirational, and your son has admitted that his shame about our relationship was based on his own insecurity rather than my failures. If our family's reputation is damaged, it's not because I succeeded outside your expectations." Dr. Martinez spoke up again.
Dr. Reeves, with all due respect, having a daughter on the bench reflects excellently on your family. The legal and medical communities have significant overlap, and Judge Reeves' work has actually enhanced the Reeves family reputation in professional circles. My father looked around at the faces of his colleagues, his friends, the social circle he'd worked decades to impress, and I could see him realizing that his narrative about my disgrace had never been as widely accepted as he'd believed. "Benjamin," my mother said quietly, placing her hand on his arm, "our daughter has become everything we raised her to be: intelligent, dedicated, principled, successful. The only mistake was trying to dictate the form that success should take." As if summoned by the emotional intensity, Camilla reappeared in the garden entrance. She'd changed from her cocktail dress into jeans and a simple blouse, her hair pulled back in a ponytail that made her look younger and more vulnerable. She approached our group with the careful determination of someone who had made a difficult decision. "Adrian," she said steadily but tired, "we need to talk."
Adrian looked at Camila with the desperate hope of a drowning man spotting a life preserver. "Camila, please, I know I should have told you about Natalie. I know I handled this wrong, but—" "Adrian, stop," she said gently but firmly. "This isn't just about your sister, though she's clearly an amazing woman who deserved better from all of you." She glanced at my parents with a look that was more disappointed than angry. "This is about the fact that you were so ashamed of something you should have been proud of that you lied to me for 2 years." The gathered guests had formed a loose circle around us, no longer pretending they weren't listening to every word. What had started as an elegant wedding rehearsal had transformed into something between family therapy and public tribunal, with 200 witnesses to decades of dysfunction being aired in real time. "I wasn't ashamed of Natalie," Adrian protested, then stopped himself. "No, that's not true. I was ashamed, but not of her accomplishments. I was ashamed of how we treated her, of what that said about me, about us." Camila studied his face with the same intensity I'd seen her use when cross-examining witnesses. "You told me your family valued excellence and achievement above all else. But when your sister achieved excellence in a different field, you couldn't even acknowledge her existence?" "You're right," Adrian said, his voice breaking slightly. "You're absolutely right. I've been a coward and a hypocrite, and I've dishonored everything I claim to believe in." My mother stepped forward, her carefully maintained composure finally cracking completely. "Camila, please don't blame Adrian entirely for this. His father and we created this situation. We forced our children to choose between family loyalty and personal integrity, and when Natalie chose integrity, we punished her for it." "Mrs. Reeves," Camila said with respectful but firm resolve, "I appreciate that you're taking responsibility, but Adrian is 31 years old. He's had 7 years to make different choices. 7 years to reach out to his sister, 7 years to tell me the truth about his family." She turned back to Adrian, and I could see tears threatening to spill from her eyes. "The man I fell in love with was supposed to be honest, principled, someone who stood up for what was right even when it was difficult. But you've spent our entire relationship lying about something fundamental." "I wanted to tell you," Adrian said desperately. "Every time you mentioned Judge Reeves, every time you cited her cases, I wanted to say, that's my sister. I was proud of her work, proud of what she had accomplished, but I was too ashamed of my own behavior to admit it." "That's exactly the problem. Your shame about your own behavior became more important than your pride in your sister's achievements, more important than honesty in our relationship." I found myself in the surreal position of watching my brother's relationship dissolve while simultaneously feeling both vindicated and heartbroken. 7 years ago, I'd been the one standing in front of my family, trying to defend my choices while they tore apart my sense of belonging. Now Adrian was experiencing something similar, and despite everything that had happened between us, I felt no satisfaction in his pain. "Camila," I said quietly, "may I say something?" She nodded, wiping away a tear that had escaped despite her efforts to compose herself. "Adrian made terrible choices about how to handle our family situation, but the man you fell in love with isn't entirely a fiction.
Growing up, he was my protector, my teacher, my biggest supporter in everything except the one thing that mattered most. He taught me to ride a bike, helped me with homework, defended me against bullies. The Adrian who could spend hours explaining calculus to his frustrated little sister is the same person who became a surgeon because he genuinely wants to help people. Adrian stared at me in shock, clearly not expecting support from the sister he'd denied. I'm not excusing his choices, I continued. What he did was wrong, and it hurt both of us. But people are complicated, Camila. They can be cowards about some things while being heroes about others. They can make terrible decisions about family while making brilliant decisions about patient care. Adrian failed as a brother, but that doesn't necessarily mean he'll fail as a husband. Why are you defending him? My father asked, sounding genuinely confused. After everything we've put you through, why would you? Because despite everything, you're still my family. I've spent 7 years building a life without you, proving I could succeed on my own terms. I don't need your approval anymore, Dad. I don't need Adrian's acknowledgement, but that doesn't mean I want any of you to be miserable.
Camilla was studying me with the same intensity she'd been focusing on Adrian. You really forgive them? After 7 years of silence? Of being erased from their lives? I don't know about forgiveness yet, I said honestly. That's going to take time and probably a lot of difficult conversations. But I know that holding on to anger would only hurt me. They've already missed 7 years of my life. I won't let them steal any more of my peace. My mother was crying openly now, her hands pressed to her mouth as if she couldn't believe what she was hearing. Natalie, I'm so sorry. I'm so incredibly sorry for all of it. I know, Mom, I said softly. I know you are. Adrian was looking between Camilla and me with an expression of wonder, as if he couldn't quite process this turn of events. Nat, I don't deserve your defense. I don't deserve any of this. No, you don't, I agreed. But that's not why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do, and because maybe it's time this family learned to support each other instead of tearing each other down. Camilla had been listening to this exchange with the careful attention of someone weighing evidence in a complex case. Finally, she spoke. Adrian, I need you to understand something. If we're going to have any chance of moving forward, you need to rebuild trust not just with me, but with your sister. You need to become the man who's proud of his family's achievements, all of them, not just the ones that fit your predetermined expectations. I will, Adrian said with more conviction than I'd heard from him all evening. I want to. Nat, I want to know everything about your life, your work, your achievements. I want to be the brother I should have been 7 years ago. That's going to take time, I warned him. 7 years of silence can't be erased with one conversation. I know, he said, but I want to try, if you'll let me. I looked around at my family, my father standing stiffly but no longer radiating anger, my mother crying tears that seemed equal parts grief and relief, my brother holding an engagement ring and waiting to see if his honesty had come too late. 7 years ago, I'd left this family because they couldn't accept who I was. Tonight, I was being asked to help them become who they should have been all along. The wedding is postponed, Camilla announced to the gathered crowd. I need time to think, and Adrian needs time to become the man I thought I was marrying. We appreciate everyone's understanding. As guests began to disperse, murmuring among themselves about the most dramatic wedding rehearsal in family history, Camilla approached me one more time. Judge Reeves, Natalie, thank you for defending Adrian when you had every right to let him face the consequences alone. That took real character. Call me when you're ready to talk about Adrian, about family, about anything. You deserve better than what happened tonight, but you also deserve the truth about who my brother really is, both the good and the bad. She squeezed my hand gratefully and walked away,
leaving me standing with my family for the first time in 7 years, all of us uncertain about what came next, but finally, perhaps ready to find out.
6 months later, I sat in my chambers at the Central Valley Courthouse, reviewing a particularly complex custody case when Mrs. Patterson knocked on my door. "Judge Reeves, you have a visitor. Dr. Adrian Reeves says he has an appointment." I looked up from my files, checking my calendar. "Send him in." These monthly coffee meetings had become our tentative bridge back to brotherhood. We'd started carefully, meeting in neutral locations like downtown cafes, discussing safe topics like our work and current events. Gradually, we'd begun to venture into more personal territory, childhood memories, professional challenges, the careful reconstruction of a relationship that had been shattered by pride and misunderstanding. Adrian entered my chambers carrying 2 coffee cups from Morrison's Cafe, the same place where Jasmine had waited during that fateful wedding rehearsal. He looked different than he had 6 months ago, less polished, more genuine, with a humility that success and privilege had never taught him. "Thought you might need the caffeine," he said, setting a cup on my desk. "Mom mentioned you've been working late on that juvenile justice reform proposal." The fact that he and our mother discussed my work still felt surreal, but it had become part of our new normal. After years of pretending I didn't exist, my family had overcorrected into following my career with almost obsessive interest. My mother kept a scrapbook of my judicial decisions, and my father had started mentioning my cases to his colleagues with what could only be described as pride. "How's the refugee clinic coming along?" I asked, accepting the coffee gratefully. Jasmine had made significant changes to his life following the wedding debacle. He'd left his prestigious position at my father's hospital and was now working part-time at a free clinic while developing surgical techniques for low-resource settings. "It's challenging," he admitted, settling into the chair across from my desk. "Yesterday, I spent 4 hours trying to remove a bullet fragment with equipment that wouldn't meet safety standards at Dad's hospital. But the patient is alive and will make a full recovery, so..." He shrugged with a satisfaction I'd never seen during his years chasing surgical prestige. "You sound happy," I observed. "I am, actually. For the first time in years, I feel like I'm doing work that matters, rather than work that impresses people." He paused, looking uncomfortable. "Nat, there's something I wanted to tell you. Camila and I have been talking." My coffee cup stopped halfway to my lips. Adrian and Camila had maintained contact over the past 6 months, working through their relationship issues with the help of a counselor. She'd returned his engagement ring, but asked for time and complete honesty before making any decisions about their future. "How is she?" I asked. "Good, really good, actually. Her immigration law practice is thriving, and she's been invited to speak at Georgetown about refugee rights." He smiled with genuine warmth. "She asks about you regularly. Wants to know how this Supreme Court consideration is progressing." The state Supreme Court nomination was still pending, another surreal development in a year full of them. My name had been floated as a candidate for the next opening, and the vetting process was both exhausting and exhilarating. "Adrian, get to the point," I said gently. He took a deep breath. "She's willing to consider trying again. Us, I mean, but she has conditions." "Such as?" "Full transparency about everything. No more lies, no more omissions, no more protecting her from uncomfortable family truths." He met my eyes. "And she wants you to be part of our lives. Really part of it, not just someone we see at obligatory family functions." The request was both touching and terrifying. I'd spent 7 years building emotional walls around the space my family had once occupied. Letting them back in, even partially, felt like inviting the possibility of being hurt again. "What do you want, Adrian?" I asked. "I want my sister back," he said simply. "I want to know about your cases, your successes, your challenges. I want to hear about the men you date and give them the protective big brother interrogation I should have been doing for years. I want to be invited to your judicial swearing-in ceremonies and boring legal conferences.
I want to be your brother again, not just someone who shares your DNA. His honesty was disarming in its completeness. This was the Adrian I remembered from childhood, direct, passionate, protective. Success and family pressure had buried that person for years, but perhaps it wasn't too late to resurrect him. And if I say yes to this reconciliation, what changes?
Everything, he said. Sunday dinners with the family, holiday traditions, inside jokes, and sibling rivalry over board games. Dad will probably try to convince you to let him set you up with eligible doctors from his hospital. I laughed despite myself. That sounds awful. It will be, Adrian agreed cheerfully. But it will also be real. No more pretending, no more perfect family image, no more lies about who we are or what we've accomplished. Just us, messy and complicated and human. Over the past 6 months, I'd already begun tentatively rebuilding relationships with my parents. My mother and I had dinner monthly, carefully rebuilding trust and affection that had been dormant for 7 years. My father and I maintained a polite but warmer relationship, bonding over our shared appreciation for professional excellence, even if we'd found it in different fields. "What about Camila?" I asked. "Assuming you two work things out, how does she feel about having a sister-in-law who witnessed her fiancé's public humiliation?" Adrian winced. "She says it was the best thing that could have happened. She needed to see who I really was, including the worst parts, before she could decide if she wanted to marry me. Your presence that night forced honesty that might have taken years to achieve otherwise." "So, I did you a favor by destroying your wedding?" "You did me a favor by being exactly who you've always been, honest, principled, unwilling to compromise your integrity for anyone's comfort." He leaned forward earnestly. "Nat, I've spent 6 months in therapy learning to understand why I was so threatened by your success, why I chose shame over pride when it came to your achievements. The truth is, you became everything I wanted to be, but was too afraid to try for." "Which is what?" "Independent, self-made, successful on your own terms rather than someone else's expectations." He smiled ruefully. "You had the courage to disappoint our parents in service of your authentic self. I never did." The conversation continued for another hour, covering territory both familiar and new. When Adrian finally left, promising to call soon with updates about Camila, I sat alone in my chambers, reflecting on the strange turns life had taken. 7 years ago, I'd been cast out of my family for choosing law over medicine, for refusing to accept their definition of success. Tonight, I was a respected judge being considered for the state Supreme Court, with a family that was finally learning to celebrate rather than fear my achievements. The irony wasn't lost on me. In trying to force me to become someone I wasn't, my family had inadvertently created someone stronger than they'd ever imagined possible. In losing their daughter, they'd gamed a judge. In rejecting my choices, they'd enabled me to make choices that ultimately elevated not just my own life, but theirs as well. My phone buzzed with a text from Jasmine. "Dinner tonight? I want to hear about the latest family drama installment." I smiled, gathering my things to leave for the day. Some things, thankfully, never changed. No matter how much my family situation evolved, I'd always have friends who kept me grounded and reminded me that the most important relationships are the ones we choose for ourselves. As I walked out of the courthouse into the evening light, I realized that 7 years after being called a disgrace, I'd finally achieved something my family had never been able to give me: peace with who I'd chosen to become. The future was unwritten, full of possibilities for continued healing and growth. But for the first time in 7 years, it was a future that included my family, not as critics or judges, but as people learning to love and support each other despite their differences. Sometimes the best revenge really is living well. Sometimes the greatest victory is not proving others wrong, but giving them the chance to make things right.
Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.